Well, how you doing, American history class? It's Mr. Nelson. This is fun. So while we're out for this 2 weeks, and it could be extended, guys, so while we're out for these 2 weeks, we're going to make an attempt to work together sort of long distance. And I know how much that my dulcet, sexy historical tones really keep you going, especially in a time like this. And I'd hate to deprive you of it with just like a worksheet packet or something. So I'm going to go ahead and just try to bring you the lessons. Now, I understand that it's a little bootleg looking. Like, for instance, I've got a post-it note right here because fun story. So I already filmed all this, right? And from where I'm sitting, I can't actually see the camera. And it wasn't until I was done with the very last slide that I looked over and found out the camera had decided to sort of suicide its focus and was doing its darndest to focus on the inside of its own eyelids. So this is my second time doing this. Anyways, I know she's a little bootleg, but it's also pretty fast and it's pretty simple, and this is kind of a test run. We're trying to figure out if I could offer this, use my channel for other teachers, for other classes, and it has to be quick and repeatable for all of them. And this is what I came up with here, just filming my screen. So what I'm going to ask you guys to do is copy these notes down. And I know that's not the most exciting thing for you to do. But you see, my goal is not necessarily to have you enjoy this the most as possible. My goal is to try to get as much of this information in your brains as I can. And, I'm not there to loom over you. I'm not there to have discussions with you. So hear it, read it, see it, write it. We're going to fall back on some pretty old school, pretty benign basics. So what your assignment essentially for this is to show up when we do finally get back together with day one, and this is day one, written in your notebooks and your own handwriting. It's got to be in your own handwriting. That's the only way I know for sure that you took the time at least to write it down, even if you were distracted. And it's not awesome, but it's what we're going to do. So for the American history class, if you were with us before, right, we just finished talking about the Battle of Britain and about how Great Britain managed to hold on, maybe not to air superiority, but to hold off the air power of Hitler's Luftwaffe. And there's really two things there. First, as long as they hold air power, there's no way Hitler could ever invade. And then second, it showed that Great Britain was not willing to give up. They were going to fight this until the ever-loving bitter end, and that the Great Britain's not going to crack. So those are two really important things. Those brave pilots of the British RAF duking it out, outgunned, outmanned, and out-armored above the skies of Great Britain. Now, this is an American history class. Can we lose our focus post-it yet? I'll put it down there. This is an American history class, and so we're going to focus primarily, of course, on our response. Now, we already talked about how FDR had no interest in remaining neutral by this point. He really felt that America needed to take the lead, that we had to make the choice before the choice was made for us. But he still got a recalcitrant Congress. We still are approaching an election year, and the American people, at least on paper, just aren't ready yet. Now, Churchill, I'll try to keep an eye on it. Churchill is begging for destroyers. He needs them to protect the shipping. Well, here we are sending goods, and Great Britain does have quite a cargo fleet, but it's just open season. They're just sitting ducks out there for the German Navy, and he needed destroyers to start running a convoy system. But Great Britain really can't build any right now. The Luftwaffe is hounding and pounding on their shipping facilities, their docks, their heavy industry. Again, if you can't manufacture wire and ball bearings, then you can't manufacture most things. So he's asking us, but to supply military machines like that, or to actually run our own military machines, is quite clearly that's a step towards war. And Roosevelt just knows that American Congress isn't really interested in going there. He knows they'll block it, but Roosevelt wants to go there. He wants to answer Churchill's call, and he comes up with kind of a sneaky idea. You see, we have got row upon row upon row of World War I battleships in mothball. They're just boats in storage. So if you look here in this picture, you can see that all of their caps are covered. You can see in the background some of the boats have got canvas over various bits and pieces. They're just in storage. They're ships we made in World War I, and we never really used them, and we parked them. So he knows he's got all these boats. So he comes up with a plan. He uses an executive action, an executive order. Now today our modern presidents use their executive orders quite a bit more common than back then. So this would have been unusual, but it's done in a brilliantly sneaky way that's both genius and a little alarming, really, if you sit back and think about it. What he does is he doesn't give Churchill destroyers. He sells Churchill X amount of tons of scrap metal. And he leaves out of the report that the scrap metal is, for the most part, destroyer shaped. That we're just going to give them some scrap iron. That passes through Congress. Whether Congress knows of the deception or chooses to be willfully ignorant of it because they want to participate as well, I don't know. Not sure. Not entirely sure. But I just love the idea that they were like, oh, I'm just going to give Churchill some scrap metal so they can build some stuff. Oh, that sounds fine. Yeah. And in exchange for naval bases, we gave them tons of scrap metal, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, in exchange for the use of naval bases. Now, we already had use of British naval bases. We've had uses of British naval bases for a long time. I mean, we're talking refueling, rearming, and repair. And we could have, in a time of need, our warships could have found safe harbor in their ports. So in exchange for something we already have, we gave them scrap metal in the form of U.S. surplus destroyers. Great Britain brought crews over, and there's some interesting reading. I can send it to you if you're curious. Interesting reading about these first crews. The boats are not awesome. They have suffered quite a bit in their storage. They've got corrosion issues. They got engine issues. Some of them had flooding issues. The equipment was decades out of date and hadn't been used in decades. Most of them had simple problems like the water and sewers weren't working because all the valves had corroded up. But whatever, Great Britain's desperate and you can poop over the side. So they fired them up and they brought them across the ocean to sort of protect that shipping. And then slowly, in some in Icelandic ports, some in Irish ports, they would haul in a few at a time and then rewire them from one end to another, put the latest Asiatic and submarine hunting equipment in them and radios and whatnot to try to bring them up to speed. Oh, we're going to lose our focus. Oh, I'm going to put my Post-it note back on. Now, with time, obviously the American public is coming used to the idea that this is a big conflict. We're seeing it in our newspapers. Today it would be in our faces, it would be on our news feeds or on our televisions, but for them it was primarily the newspaper. And as stories and pictures begin to come in, the American public knows that this Hitler thing is not a joke. And slowly we begin to wake up to the danger of Hitler, as they say. And one of the things that really shook us was the idea that Adolf Hitler was acquiring the weapons of war of the various countries that he is defeating. And this is still a time period when the largest manifestation of military force is a battleship. I mean, Japanese haven't taught us that they're kind of a big target in a world of aircraft. And so as Hitler marches across Europe in the early stages of the war, he's acquiring this. He's acquiring the equipment of these countries. And there was an incident that took place in the Mediterranean Sea that really kind of highlights this. For the most part, a good portion of the French Navy is already in British ports. They've been in there since Dunkirk, and Great Britain made sure when France fell that those warships, which were ordered to return, did not. They were barricaded in the ports. But there was some in the Mediterranean where France had a base, and there was a British commander who brought his forces in, and he basically is outside this port, and he's parked out there. And originally they started communicating with the flashing lights. They'd signal back and forth, but he's essentially begging the French, join us. Now, the French commander, of course, has orders from his naval headquarters that he is to remain in port and to defend himself, but to remain in port and do not take the ships out and wait for further orders. Essentially, the Germans kind of were on their way. And so this British commander eventually climbs in a shore boat and goes over there, and he gets on the French commander's boat, and they have a heated discussion, and this man is just, we cannot let you give these to the Germans. This can't happen. And the French commander is equally adamant, of course. He's got orders, and that's a British commander, right? That's the British Navy, and they understand the idea of sail your ship to the bottom, but do not abandon it at any cost, and follow orders no matter what they are. So they understand that, but they're just begging and begging and begging. And he finally says, look, we can't let you. You need to understand, son. We can't let the Germans have these. Do you see what we're saying? You can't let them fall to the wrong hands. And the French basically says, I have my orders, and I'm going to stay. So the British give him an ultimatum. They give him a timeline. It's like, man, you've got, I'll just pick noon. You've got till noon, dude. You've got till noon. Join us, or we can't let this go on. And he goes back to his ship, and it continues flashing, continues communicating. Noon comes and goes, and all right, you've got till you got till 12:15. You've got till 12:32, and not a moment. You're just begging and begging and begging. It's kind of easy to see if warships are on a war footing. Those giant guns, right? When a ship's at rest, or when a ship is just transitioning, the guns sit in cradles. First off, it's a fair bit of weight, and if the ships are moving at ocean and the gun barrels are pounding up and down, and they're not on their rests, it's pretty hard on the equipment. We'll do it for fighting, right? But we don't leave them sitting on the elevators. And the British came in loaded for bear, right? So all their guns are off the cradles, and they're all pointed. Okay, but the French boats are at rest, which means all their guns are on the cradles. And they'd seen smoke come out of the stacks, and secretly, I suspect the British were hoping that was the French making a big show of, hey, we're not going to do anything, until then we zip out and we join the British. And again, I'll feed you, I'll arm your ships, we'll fuel your ships, come fight alongside us, fight for the glory of France, but I got my orders. The thing is, it's depressingly clear, right? And when it goes wrong, because the French guns come off the cradles, and that's just it, right? That's that first time. From here, I know that we can talk. Remember, the British, their guns were off the cradles from the beginning, but when the French guns lift off the cradles and begin to rotate, that was it. That was the moment. That was the line in the sand that the British commander had drew, and they opened fire with a massive broadside and sank everything. Almost 1,300 French sailors died. British lost 2 sailors. There was a battleship the French lost, 5 of their small destroyers and cruisers or whatnot. But Great Britain couldn't just, they talk about the British sailing away in tears, right? Just absolutely heartbroken, but they simply could not I can't let Germany have them. I can't let Germany have the boats. And this story, today, it would certainly get our attention, but for your great-grandparents, the idea that Great Britain had to fire on a friend to keep those weapons out of the control of the Germans was a little eye-opening in the United States. It was one of those events that kind of started to bring us around. And Congress responds with a peacetime draft. Now, peacetime draft, right, is sort of an acknowledgement that while we're not at war, we expect to be fairly soon. And, we've talked about this. The United States does not have very frightening neighbors, so we had not maintained large military land forces because, we didn't feel the need. In Europe, obviously, your neighbors are very, very frightening, very intimidating. Everybody always felt the need to posture and poise, and so their militaries were far more robust. Ours really weren't. The Canadians are happy to be invited, and Pancho Villa had hung up his spurs down south, and so we didn't really have much. So this was kind of an acknowledgement that we needed to pull it together. And they brought in 800,000. That doesn't necessarily mean that all 800,000 made it into combat roles or through the draft selection, but it does mean that we start putting it together. And as I said before, it turns out that the CCC, had helped us prepare a generation of young men to fight in kind of an ironic way. Now, the election in 1940, America's never been keen on changing horsemen during the apocalypse, and so it kind of makes sense that they reran FDR, but it also kind of doesn't. It's really a mess. The American people, it fell. The American people are a little unsure of what to do and who to talk to or whatnot, and so they just weren't. It was a mess. The whole thing was just a confusing political mess. Now, for the Republicans, they ran a guy named Wendell Willkie, and Willkie is a staunch isolationist and not a pacifist per se, but keep America out of the war. That was kind of his platform. We will not enter this conflict no matter what happens. He's going to be backed by those Northern Republican interests, and in the beginning at least, he seemed to be drawing a fair bit of attention. Now, the Democrats decided to run Roosevelt for a third term. The 2 terms for a president thing is today a law, constitutional amendment, but it wasn't back then. But it is what George Washington had done. And America is very traditional, and so we just didn't, see a need to break with his stance on all of this. And it kind of been law. I suppose Teddy Roosevelt gave it a shot. He took a break in between. He didn't fill all of his first term, and he changed political parties for the third one. But FDR is just boom, 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 3 in a row. And it's kind of hard for us to break that. The outcome is pretty clear. So we've talked about this. Some of these older maps, the colors are different. Remember, the red Republican, blue Democrat is an arbitrary choice made, and these maps were made at a time before that. In this case, our Republicans are red, but our Democrats are the green here. And if you look at the Electoral College, right, we have 84.5% for Roosevelt, so a fairly concise victory there. The popular vote is much closer at 54.75%. Sorry, 54.75%. So it's still, by our modern elections, a reasonable margin of victory, but it's not the clear landslide that maybe Roosevelt had enjoyed in the past. And you'll notice in this instance, Montana still has the 4th Electoral College vote. I I think the American people had accepted that this was maybe coming and were preparing for it. And I think that, the idea that Roosevelt got us through the Depression, whether it's true or not, he could get us through the war. We just sort of needed that hug. I suspect, even though I might, in my vocal musings have been staunchly, I'm not going to enter the war and fight, we're not going to enter the war and fight, I suspect that most of America recognized by 1940 that, man, we're going to get sucked into this thing. And there was Roosevelt saying, look, we're going to get sucked into this thing, and it might as well be on our terms. And I think that's really what attracted him. That's why he pulled it off. That Wilkie was just a little too out of touch for where we were and where we were going and what we're going to do. So if you were here with me, this is what your homework would be. And who knows how this will change as we go forward. But it's not your homework now. I'm not going to ask you for that. I am, however, like I said, I want to see day 1. You can put the date if you want. What is the date? 16th. Day before St. Patrick's Day. Thanks Patrick's Day? Weird. Anyways, I'm not going to ask for it. Okay? So what I want is March 17th notes, day 1 notes, just these notes. I want them in your own hand, and I will check them when we all get back together, and I will give you credit based on that. Once again, my point is not necessarily for your greatest enjoyment. It is simply I need to force you, so to speak, to learn this stuff, and it's harder to do it when I'm not right there to put it in your brains directly. So I hope all of you are doing well. We'll all get through this together. Wash your hands. Don't lick the doorknobs. Keep your distance from people. Don't cough in each other's faces. Don't share spoons or water bottles. We'll all get out of this. Miss you guys, and I'll see you when we're back together again.